A growing alignment in government, corporate and investor interests over the last few years has shifted the narrative surrounding financial technology innovation in Australia. With me today is Fintech Australia's CEO, Danielle Szetho, to discuss the evolving nature of fintech, the new opportunities that can be realised, as well as what we can expect to see by way of reform. Danielle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by asking you firstly, what is it that stands in the way of Australia fulfilling its potential and becoming a regional hub for innovation?
I think probably the biggest thing that's standing in our way is a lot of the actual internal attitude or the culture of Australian startups. I think Australia is really challenged in that we are quite geographically isolated. It takes us sort of 5 hours minimum to get pretty much anywhere except for New Zealand. Potentially even Tasmania. But it's challenging for us to really think outside of that box. And we've got a population of somewhere around 25 million. That's a sort of big enough market to make a bit of a splash. But at the same time, we're competing globally against these players that have got millions and billions of customers. So I think unless we really start to break that mindset and really sort of bring about a bit more awareness of the need to actually think global from the start, it's going to really limit our capacity to actually act as a regional hub.
And how important are super funds in contributing to the development of fintech in Australia?
I think they've actually got a really big role to play, because when you think about the fact that, first of all, they're sitting on a mountain of potential capital. Australia's got the 5th largest superannuation pool in the world, which is remarkable for the fact that we're a tiny, tiny population relative to the other nations. I mean, you're talking Japan, Canada, the US, having bigger pools than us, but I mean, we've only got 25 million, as I said. So, we've got a lot of potential capital for, investment in the fintech industry. The other side of it is also that, there's a lot of great talent in the superannuation industry here. And in fact, in the upcoming National Fintech Census, which we're going to be releasing on the 3rd of November, one of the surprising facts that we actually found is that we've got a really strong and growing emerging capability in the personal financial management and asset management startup space. So if you look at where fintechs in Australia are actually focusing their time and effort, we had a very strong leaning toward lending, which I think everybody kind of knew. But the really surprising one was the second highest focus area was actually in PFM and asset management. So, it's an emerging trend for us. I think from the government's perspective, they're really keen to actually, take that and see if that's actually an opportunity for us as an export capability. And, with respect to the superannuation industry, I think there's great talent, great capital to be able to actually enable that to happen.
Now, building on that, I note with great interest the recent launch of H2Ocean, and I think this was quite an interesting move because it gave retail investors greater access to fintech startups. Danielle, can you tell us a bit more about the emerging opportunities for Australian investors in this space?
Yeah, I think the launch of H2Ocean is a really, really interesting opportunity for the retail space because, coming back to that thing about the mind shift, another mind shift that I think is potentially a little bit broken in Australia is, this kind of short-termism and the fact that, the majority of people in Australia tend to invest in either property, which is their long-term asset, but, it's very tangible, something they can kind of see straight away. And, in fact, immediately, if you look at, the Sydney market in particular, you're getting these really high capital gains in short spaces of time. As opposed to the fact that, a lot of people are also invested in the Australian share market. But they're invested in Australian banks, which means, you're getting these constant dividend returns, very constant high yielding, outcomes. So I think when it comes to things like H2Ocean, what that's really sort of starting to look at is a trend toward trying to actually get people to invest longer term. Because when you think about investing in startups, the investment pattern of startups is that you probably won't actually see any returns for a pretty decent chunk of time. Every single scrap of profit is reinvested back into that business to really make it scale. So you're probably not going to see returns for at least, anywhere between sort of 5 to 10 years, which is a completely different way of actually thinking about an investment. And I think it'll be a really great test for H2Ocean to see, what the actual shareholder market is actually looking at and whether that's actually something that would be of interest to them. And I really hope that it would be because, we really need to be breaking that short-term mindset.
And if we adopt a bit of a forward-looking view, How will Fintech Australia work with key stakeholders such as the federal government, corporate regulators like ASIC, in terms of progress and reform?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we go back to the point I raised about the short-termism as well as the, the inward focus of the community here, I think some of the areas where we're going to be focusing on with respect to our work with the government and with Treasury, and also with other bodies like Austrade actually, is how we can actually support the fintech community, whether it's with resources or education, about the different markets that they can potentially scale in, and also supporting them with opportunities to look at investing their businesses to grow. So, you look at the government launchpads that ASIC has been, that Austrade has been investing in. You look at the reciprocal relationships that ASIC's actually building with other markets. So they actually signed the relationship with the UK's FCA, their equivalent body, with Singapore's MAS. We'd really love to see that type of reciprocal engagement model replicated through the ASEAN region, because that would actually really help our startups as they're actually looking overseas to get footholds in those markets with the regulators, and get much more understanding of what's actually required for them to actually establish, expansion opportunities in those markets. So whether it's working with ASIC to actually help develop those relationships, working with Austrade to also help to educate our startups on how they can leverage the existing infrastructure that's there, and also then working, of course, with our great friends at Treasury who've been very supportive of Fintech Australia's efforts with respect to promoting Australia as a fintech investment and innovation destination. We're really looking forward to doing a lot more in that space.
And looking at or coming to your immediate priorities, you mentioned your national fintech census earlier. Can you tell me a bit more about this, as well as some of the other key initiatives that Fintech Australia is currently focusing on?
Yeah, sure. And I have to say, I'm really, really excited about the national fintech census, because when I came on board, and that was about 4 months ago that we sort of first met and had that conversation, I said there's sort of 2 or 3 things I really want to tick within the first 6 months. It was the National Fintech Census, the National Fintech Summit, so we're running that on the 3rd and 4th of November, Collide in Melbourne. And then the other thing was, looking at how we actually establish the organisation and really help that to grow. So meeting with our members, understanding what their needs are. And I think we've ticked all those things really well. So the National Fintech Census, we had around about 163 companies respond to that across Australia, which I'm pretty happy with, but to be honest, we've done internal estimates, and I actually think that's probably only around about 65% of the market. I suspect we have, close to 250 over fintechs in Australia and growing rapidly. So certainly next year, I think we'll certainly see a really big jump in those numbers. But already from the 163 fintechs, we're seeing some really great results with respect to our understanding of the maturity of the different markets. So we saw around about 55% of the fintech communities based in Sydney. That's not a surprise. But what we actually did see was that the 3rd highest market for fintech after Sydney and Melbourne was actually Perth. And having just been in Perth actually, and been on the ground and talking to some of the people, there's some really unique characteristics of that market. The time zone proximity to Asia, the fact that when you talk to the fintechs there, they do not think national. They're not looking east to Sydney and Melbourne to actually look to expand their businesses. They are looking north. And I love that. I think that's fantastic. And, hopefully we can actually work alongside the government there to really prove out and help their businesses really get and build those relationships in the ASEAN markets. So I think, the fintech census is going to be really great for showcasing some opportunities around where the government can be investing money in infrastructure to support the startup community in each of the different markets. And we really look at that from the perspective of sort of 5 major areas. You've got your talent, your capital, your access to customers, the availability of space like co-working spaces, and then of course the favourable policy and regulatory settings to actually enable those other 4. So that's probably going to be our biggest focus in the next sort of 12 months, is how we can leverage that research to really drive home the message that there's certain investments that need to be made, and how we can actually shape the investment to make sure it's going to the right places and the areas that actually need it most in each market.
Danielle, thanks so much for your time.
Not at all, absolute pleasure.